Coast to coast, border to border, and around the world, it's time for The Bill Alexander Show. The Bill Alexander Show is a guest-driven program where the topics are diverse and entertaining. Laugh and learn while you listen to one of the best hours of online radio. Now, here's your host, Bill Alexander.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of The Bill Alexander Show with yours truly, William Eric Alexander. All my friends call me Bill, and welcome to the program on this wonderful day. I'm so glad you can join us because I think you'll find this program to be a real treat because we're going to be talking to someone who was very close to what I would consider a TV and movie icon. Who am I talking about? Don Knotts. Who are we talking with? His daughter, Karen. Karen, how are you doing today?
Hi, Bill. I'm doing great. Thank you. It's very sunny out here in Los Angeles today.
Well, that is great, but I understand you're coming back my way in the next few days because you have two shows coming up, one in Parkersburg and one not very far from where I'm sitting right now in Morgantown, West Virginia, which is where your dad grew up and also went to college.
That's right. I'm really excited about this. Of course, I've been to Morgantown before, and I interviewed people for my book. So I went back to my father's hometown to interview people who had known him, but what it really turned out to be was the sons and daughters of the people that he went to school with, and they told me some wonderful stories. So I'm now really excited to go back and do the show for them, because now they can feel like they're a part of it.
Now, what is the show consisting? Is it you basically doing your book or just doing question and answers, or how's this going to work?
No, it's a full one-person show.
Okay.
Very similar to what Lily Tomlin did. I don't know if any of your listeners ever... Yes?
I've seen it, so I know what you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah, it's a full one-person show, and it's got characters, it's funny, and it's also got a lot of pictures of Dad in it, and it's got some movie clips, and it's a real experience. It takes people through his life and mine and how our lives intertwined.
Okay. And I was going through some stuff before we talked, and I don't want to talk about the negative thing last, but when your father passed away in 2006, there is a portion where it says that you actually had to leave the room that you were in with him because you just had to laugh. And you make the comment that it wasn't because he said anything funny, it was because he was funny.
That's right. I was very surprised. It was just an offhand comment that I made, and it's been replayed so many times. I was really surprised at that, but yeah, he was just being funny. He was just so naturally funny, just so gifted. And he could just be funny just by his look or, a shake of his head or something would just crack you up. And so my stepmother and I were both in just hysterics. And I ran out of the room. She stayed there. She has a softer, quieter laugh than I do. And I was telling this story to a friend, Howard Storm. He directed Mork and Mindy. And
yes.
Howard knew my dad, and I was just happening to be interviewing him about my book, and I told him that story, and he said, "Oh, you should have just stayed and laughed. That's what comedians live for."
So, how old was your dad when he realized that he wanted to be a comedian? He wanted to perform perform for people.
I would say 5 years old.
Okay. And what basically gave him that ambition to do it?
Well, his mother took him to see the Laurel and Hardy pictures, which were playing at the time in the local theater, probably at the Metropolitan Theater, which is a movie house. And he was just completely done away by that, and he went home imitating Stan Laurel for days. Uh-huh. And he knew right away that's what he wanted to do, and it just became a goal every day of his life to make it in show business from that point on.
And that is just amazing. So when did he decide to move to New York?
He was 18 years old the first time he went, and he struggled and struggled to find his comedy. He was, like I said, naturally funny, but he didn't really learn how to control that humor. He was the butt of a lot of people's jokes because they knew how to tease him and provoke him to where he would be angry or frustrated, and that was, funny. But he didn't know how to make them laugh when he wanted it to be there until he studied his older brother Shadow, who my dad said in his own book was a naturally gifted comedian. And through studying Shadow, he began to learn some techniques, and he learned ventriloquism. And so he performed a lot of shows in high school and in the Army. But before he even went into the Army, he'd become so popular and such a hit in high school that he felt confident enough to go to New York and try to break in on his own. And he went there, and of course it was a bust. He didn't know what he was doing, and he was too young. But it was a valuable experience.
So before we started, I mentioned that earlier that I had the opportunity to interview Steve Allen in 1995, and is it considered that Steve Allen gave your dad his big break?
He definitely did. But before that, it was really Bill Dana, who was a producer on the Steve Allen Tonight Show.
Oh, okay.
And for many of your friends listening, probably don't know anything about that, but the Steve Allen Tonight Show was live television days, way back at the very beginning of television. And the Steve Allen Tonight Show was one of the top shows for comedy. It was a sketch comedy show, like Saturday Night Live.
Right.
And Steve Allen really, in my opinion, pioneered the first Men on the Street.
And we were talking, that's funny you mentioned it, because when I interviewed him so many years ago, we talked about that. And he said that because when he did the Man on the Street, of course it was mainly staged, but he had Louis Nye, and he also had your dad, who would be the ones interacting with Steve Allen, so-called in a studio, while they were on the street, and they would just be answering his questions and doing it in a way that the audience enjoyed, and they were funny.
Exactly. And they also had Tom Post.
Tom Post, yeah.
So it was the three of them, and they were just an incredibly funny team. It was hysterical, and my dad really became famous from doing that nervous guy bit.
So when did he get from the Steve Allen program to what I think everybody knows him as Barney Fife on the Andy Griffith Show?
Well, he auditioned for a play on Broadway. This is what I love about the book is it tells all these in-between steps that people want to know. He was in New York, and he was hanging around with a lot of the New York comics. Buddy Hackett, Jerry Stiller, Milton Berle was among them, and there were just a lot of these guys, Red Buttons, Phil Silvers, all these guys started in New York in the 1950s. They knew each other. And so he's hanging out with them, and they would meet in the coffee shop, and they would trade stories about what was going on in the trades, or they would talk about, auditions and everything. And so one day, Dad walked into the coffee shop, and his buddy said, "What are you doing? I thought you'd be at the audition for the new Broadway play. It's No Time for Sergeants. They're looking for Southerners who were in the Army." And that was exactly what he was.
Right.
And he just couldn't believe that he had missed it. He hadn't read the trades that day. So he just ran like heck to make it to this audition. And he did get in, and he got a small part. And that was a show that Andy Griffith was starring in, and it was his first breakout role as a star. And that's how he met Andy Griffith. So from there, when Andy had a pilot on TV, Andy got him in on that.
Was it your dad? And I read this, and I don't know where I read it at, but your dad went to Andy and said, basically, a sheriff needs a deputy, and I'm the one that needs to be the deputy?
No. What happened was, Dad saw him performing, and the show pilot for the Andy Griffith Show was on the Danny Thomas Show. And that was Sheldon Leonard's idea. Sheldon Leonard was the big mastermind of television sitcoms back then. And so he was producing that show as well. So he had an idea, well, since Danny Thomas is so popular, everybody's watching that show, why don't we put Sheriff Taylor there and let people see, how good that show is, and then they'll want to tune into the new show. So that's where my dad saw him, saw that Andy, he didn't know that Andy had this pilot until he saw him on the Danny Thomas Show. So he gave him a call and said, "Hey, don't you think that the Sheriff Taylor could use a deputy. And Andy said, well, I thought you were doing Steve Allen. And Dad said, no, that show has been over since spring. So he said, well, call Sheldon Leonard, Andy said.
And basically, that's when your dad became a household name, was because of the Andy Griffith Show, because in some ways, I still believe this when I watch the show to this day, which is still airing on TV, I think, everywhere, that your dad steals the show for the most part in a lot of the programs.
Oh, yeah, sure he does. And Andy knew that, but, Andy was very gracious. He stepped aside. He was originally going to be the funny one.
Yeah.
But he very quickly realized, no, that's not going to be me. That's going to be Don. But he didn't have any qualms about, nowadays, gosh, some stars, can you imagine some of the stars today just stepping aside and say, oh, okay, I'm just going to be straight man to this guy who's funnier than me? No, that doesn't happen very often, ever.
Especially if you're the one the show is named after, and
exactly.
You're the attractive one, and you have this, I don't want to say that he's unattractive, but he's not the one that you would feel that the audience would be attracted to, but yet they were.
They were, sure. But, that was Andy. Andy had this real giving side to him, and to him what mattered most was the show being the best that it could possibly be. And for him, that meant Dad being the funny one.
And most people, I don't know if most people should know this, but there is someone that also was on that program who grew up on the show, who grew up in front of everybody, and that was Ronnie Howard. And when your dad was on the show, did you interact with Ron Howard?
I did. I went on the set, and I met him a couple of times, and that was a lot of fun. It was interesting to me because he was not like any of the other kids I'd ever met. Okay.
And what made him different than the other kids that you've met?
Well, he had sort of a gravitas about him, like an adult maturity in a way. He was a kid still, but he just had this whole higher level going on.
Okay.
Where he was living an adult life basically.
Yeah.
Of course, they did have some things on the sets where he could play, and his little brother who played the character of Leon, Clint Howard.
Yes.
But he also had the gang of kids, and so when those gang of kids were on, they would play basketball on the set and baseball and everything.
So, how old were you when you realized that your dad performed in front of people, and that's what his job was?
I always knew that because I was watching him on the Steve Allen Show when I was like 5 years old or something like that. So as soon as I was old enough to have an awareness, I knew my dad was an actor.
Because it's interesting when I ask other people whose parents were actors and actresses when they realized it, and if they knew their dad or their mother was someone special. And it's interesting that you said you remember him because you remember from the Steve Allen Show. Now, not only was he doing the Andy Griffith Show at the time, he was doing movies also.
That's right. He left the show at the end of 5 years, which was the contract that they had signed. It was a 5-year contract. And my dad was always very practical about work. He never wanted to be out of work.
Okay.
He was very, very, very neurotic about that. So he immediately started looking for work, and he got an offer from Lou Wasserman at Universal Studios for a 5-picture deal. And Lou Wasserman said to him, you know something? I cannot believe that the incredible Mr. Limpet was not a huge success. If Disney had done that movie, it would have been a blockbuster, but somehow they didn't market it right.
Well,
and in those days, they didn't know how to market it because it was the first, live-action animation feature film ever done.
And the funny thing is, not that you can see it right now, but I actually have that movie sitting in my studio because that is one of my favorite films that your dad did. Now, of course, I have it on DVD, but it's one of those unique films of combining animation with live action. And it was very well done for the time, and I guess if you watch it enough, you can see where there's a little bit of inconsistency. But for the time period, it was just well done.
It was very well done, and they didn't. Funny thing is, the voice of Ladyfish.
Yes.
Somewhere along the line, they had to recast that the voice wasn't working. And so they had to redo, and that in those days it took a long time. You had to redo everything. It took forever. But it was interesting for me as a child. I went to the set of the Andy Brooks show. I mean, the Incredible Mr. Limpet, and Carol Cook she played his wife, that lovely redheaded lady. And I remember watching her. She was putting the glasses on the fish.
Uh-huh.
If you remember that scene,
yes,
that
yes.
Mr. Limpet loses his glasses in the fall. So she's putting the glasses on the fish. And I was so fascinated by that because it was this very heartfelt scene that just made you want to cry. And when I watched that, she was putting the glasses into a box, and I saw later it was just a box full of junk, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, the power of her imagination. And that was actually what made me realize how strongly I wanted to be an actress because of that moment with her, you know. I connected with her being an actress.
Now, I go through and I think of your dad's movies, and how many did he actually do? Because it seems like he was everywhere during the 60s and the 70s on film.
He was. He did. I don't know how many movies. That's impossible for me to count that out. There were so many, but, you know, he did them all through his life. But, you know, it was interesting for me when I was writing my book, which just came out in September 21st.
Uh-huh.
That gave me a chance to document a little bit more and interview people and find out a little bit more about my dad's career. And I was just astonished at how much work, his body of work, and how comprehensive it really is. And people that didn't live through that era, they don't know about all the variety shows. Because at that time, people didn't know. But we're talking about the 1970s,
right.
The 60s and 70s. He did dozens of these shows. And the variety shows brought a lot of actors back from the previous era who had been big movie stars in the 40s and gave them a second life on television, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, though, nobody knew that these big old tapes, at the time they were 3/4-inch tapes. They were like big bricks.
Right.
They took up a lot of space in the vaults. They had no way of knowing that technology was going to make it possible for them to recycle these things. So they literally burned all these great shows, not knowing. And so it's just heartbreaking to me to think about how many of these shows that my dad did that we'll never see again.
And when you look at the films, and I mean, he did do a segment with Disney. He did, and one of my favorite films growing up as a kid was The Apple Dumpling Gang, and him working with Tim Conway, which those two worked so beautifully together because it was like they were able to anticipate what each other were doing. And again, it was just one of those films that stuck with me as a kid. The other one, and the reason is because I'm a big Volkswagen lover, is he does Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo with Dean Jones and the little love bug where he's playing the mechanic in the film. And these, for people my age, these films we remember because your dad was someone that I think we could relate to and approach because of the way he was. He wasn't threatening on the screen. He wasn't a big burly man, but someone that we could actually identify with.
That's very true. And, you know, personally, I had such a wonderful relationship with my dad. And this is another thing I get to explore in my book is what he was like as a person. Mm-hmm. And I was always a little bit frustrated because a lot of people thought my dad was just like Barney Fife.
Yes, you know, I can see that.
He so brilliantly portrayed that character that it seems to people like that was a real person. Mm-hmm. And in their minds, Barney Fife is a real person. And so I always got questions about Barney Fife, and it frustrated me because my dad was such a fascinating character himself. And I wrote the book because I wanted people to see that. I wanted people to understand my dad, what he was like to be around. He was just such a fascinating guy. I mean, he had this magnetism about him. Even sitting in a room, not saying a single word, he had the attention of everybody. Mm-hmm. It was fascinating to me.
And the one thing I think, though, as TV viewers, that I think we may have had a problem identifying with is when he became Ralph Furley on Three's Company. because none of us saw him as this, do I want to use the term swinger or what, in the 1970s.
Well, but wasn't Barney a swinger?
Well, I would have. Okay, I mean, if you look at it, I guess you could say he was, but I don't know.
Sure, he had the the thing on the side with Juanita, and all the women were flirting with him. It was a very PG way of saying, okay, this guy is hot. So the 70s were the decade where it kind of broke through a little bit. Society changed a little bit, became a little bit more permissive, and and suddenly you had, okay, here's a guy living with two girls, and they're in a platonic friendship, and it's okay, And I'll tell you, one group of people that really loved Mr. Furley was the gays.
Oh, yes.
Because all of a sudden, he had these flamboyant outfits.
I can see that, yeah.
And so it was just an outgrowth of the society.
Now, he was also in a movie in the late 60s called The Love God, which I could see that tying into the Ralph Furley character.
Exactly. I'm glad you brought that movie up. A lot of people don't know about that movie.
I've seen... I mean, I could go through a list. He was in another one of my favorites as a kid. Hot Lead, Cold Feet was one of my favorite films.
Yeah, that was a great one with Jack Elam.
Yes, yeah. And he did The Prize Fighter again with Tim Conway, and he did a lot of films that I think that some of us, if we didn't realize that he was Barney Fife, I think that we would have realized. I mean, kids at the time really didn't know who Barney Fife was, but he was a very well-renowned actor because he did so many films and he did so many variety shows, like you said. I think there's a picture of him floating on the internet, him with Cher, dressed up, and it's like, I don't remember that. But again, I would have been in my early teens at the time, and again, it's just very interesting.
Yes, that's right. But he had so many sides to him, and people do have that locked into their minds that he was Barney Fife, but he really was not Barney Fife. He was a multiplex of characters in himself, and he had this dry delivery, where he would be sitting in a party or something, and he would hardly say anything, and then suddenly he'd just lean in and say something that would just flatten everybody. It was so witty.
Now, you made a comment because when you saw what your dad did, and you were actually in one of his films, you were in The Shakiest Gun in the West, and you were the young girl watching the shootout, correct?
That's right.
In 1968. They didn't even give you a credit. You were uncredited in the film, but you also...
Well, I was an extra.
Yeah.
You don't give credit to extras.
But you also had your own acting career, where if we go back and look at it, we could see where you were doing the same thing that your dad did.
I kind of have, in a way, followed his career in a way, because not meaning to, but I started out doing this live show, and he also had a one-man show, which he did later in life, much later on, when he was older. So I did that first because I was showing the world about my life with him. But we really paralleled a lot of each other in a lot of ways.
And there's one film that I forgot all about, but when I pulled some stuff up that you were in, and you played the character Mavis in the Vice Academy films.
Oh my gosh, you saw that. Yeah.
Yes, I did. And I remember watching them as an adult or young adult in college. And you worked with, why did her name just escape me?
Jane Hamill. Hamill.
And also Julia Parton.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It was in the film. And it's like, I'm looking at these going, okay, I remember these. But if anybody saw you as Mavis and the black wig, I don't think they would have known that was you. Did you do that purposely?
Well, that was the director, Rick Sloan.
Yes.
He had a slew of these films, and that was it was his conception. The whole thing came from his brain, and to him, it's like we were all dolls in a dollhouse. You know
okay.
what I mean? We were real people. We were like little dolls that he controlled, and the look of the sets and everything, the costumes, was all his design. And I think he did a beautiful job of that. He's actually coming out with another movie too. He
really?
Told me. Yeah, I wasn't able to do this one, but I'm sure it's going to be wonderful.
And I'm also looking through this, and I did not realize this, but you were in the 1986 TV movie Return to Mayberry.
That's right.
And you were Opie's, Ron Howard's receptionist in the film.
That's right.
And I recently before I even was going to talk to you, I came across that movie about 4 months ago and watched it again. And when you do watch that film from 86, it does reinvoke those feelings of the 1960s. And it's done. And the one thing that frustrated me about the film is your dad never married. And that he did not marry, why can't I think of her name?
Betty Lynn.
Betty Lynn, that's it. And that he did not marry her, because I think that was the perfect relationship. He did?
He did, in Return to Mayberry.
Oh, okay.
They did get married.
Okay,
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, it took that long for them to decide.
It took 20 years.
Married. But yeah, everybody was single in Mayberry, if you think about it.
Yeah, that's true. It's amazing that Opie was ever born, to be honest with you. If you look at it.
That's true. There's never any mention of his mother at all in the show.
Yeah, well, there is early on. But, okay, this is another thing I have for you. And I've seen it and I can find it. But when they originally had your dad with Andy Griffith, there's a line where your dad calls him Cousin Andy.
Mm-hmm.
Were they actually cousins, or was it just something that was a close connection between the two?
No, that was an idea they started out with, and they decided to drop it after a couple of episodes because they figured it would be too limiting.
Okay.
Then they'd have to tie all these characters, relatives, and everything like that. So they just dropped it.
Okay. Because in a lot of ways, Aunt Bee would have been Barney's Aunt Bee, but they called her that anyhow.
That's exactly the kind of problem that would exist,
Okay, because I was just curious, because I remember that. I've told people this, and they go, no, they're not. And I go, yes, they are, because I can find it, and it was before Aunt Bee moved in, is where it said. And I can picture it and everything else, but anyhow.
Well, I think that line actually started out just as a joke.
Okay.
Because he said, I'm so glad that you've examined all the best candidates, and after all of that, you chose me, Cousin Andy. Mm-hmm. So that was just a joke. I don't think it was maybe not even meant that they were cousins, and maybe they considered it after that.
Okay.
But they decided not it wouldn't work.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've watched so many hours of classic television that there's times that I misconstrue things, and then 20 years later I remember it as something else, and I ask somebody and they go, no, you're wrong, but at least this way you confirmed what I remember. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. So the show you're doing is going to be this weekend.
Yeah.
And are you looking forward to it? Is it going to be one of those things that you get to come back home, or you come back to Dad's home and be in the places he's been and doing?
Yes, I'm super excited. I have performed my show in Morgantown before, but it's been a while. And I haven't performed there since I wrote my book. Okay. And since I came back there and I interviewed people who knew him. And now it's going to be great because now they're a part of this, in a way. And I'm also very excited because during the pandemic, all my shows were canceled.
Oh, yeah.
And so, so that was my first time performing the show again in about 2 years. So I'm really excited now.
Oh, okay. And that's great. That really is, that you're able to do that. Now, one question I have for you, and actually you may not know this, but a friend of mine, and as I told you where I live just outside of the city in Uniontown, which is about 30 minutes north of Morgantown. So it could have been considered your dad's old stomping grounds when he was in college. A friend of mine remembers that your dad or at least this is what her grandmother said, used to go ice skating in a small town in Pennsylvania called Point Marion, which is just over the state line. And there was a rink there, and he would come up and he would skate. And when they found out I was going to do this, they said, you need to ask her to see if she knows anything about it, which I doubt you would. But there's a lot of people around here that have a very close connection to your dad who are in that age group that have told these stories about associating with him.
Well, it's highly likely that he went to that rink because Pennsylvania is very close to West Virginia.
Yes.
And, they would go there for a lot of events that took place in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
They had a lot of bands come through there and all kinds of exciting things. So I'm sure it's probably true.
Okay. Well, she will be grateful to hear that you can give some confirmation to that. Karen, this has really been fun. I am so glad you're able to join me today. And I'm doing what I can to readjust my schedule so I can see you on Sunday. Because I would like to come down and see the show and see what you're doing and how you pay tribute to your father. Because, again, for a lot of us, he was probably would have been the nicest guy to ever meet if you saw him walking up the street. Again, like Steve Allen would do, the man on the street. So.
Thank you for that. I hope you can make it. It's Parkersburg on March 12th,
which is
8
Saturday.
PM.
Yeah.
And then in Morgantown at the Metropolitan at 4 p.m. on Sunday.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm going to try to make it to Morgantown on Sunday. So I got to readjust some things, but I think I should be able to do it. So.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
I hope I get to see you.
Oh, I would love to. That'd be fantastic. So before I let you go, is there anything you'd like to tell my audience before you leave and get ready for your performances here in West Virginia over the weekend?
Well, I certainly hope that any of you listening can come see my shows, either one of them. And it would be great. We're having a little book signing afterwards, too. And so I would really hope that you could make it. It would be fun. And if not, I'll be coming around. I'll be performing in West Virginia again in October, I believe, but not in this location, in other areas of West Virginia.
Okay. Well, Karen, thank you very much. Good luck with everything, with the book, with your stage show and everything. And it was a real pleasure talking to you today.
Same here, Bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Karen, thank you very much. That was a pleasure.
Oh, you're welcome. I enjoyed it, too. You're a very good interviewer. And, you had interviewed a friend of mine, Tracy Newman.
Yes, I did. That was last week.
Yeah. I know her from the Groundlings.
Oh, do you really? Were you part of the Groundlings?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
I was, but I never got to be in the performing group, but I was in the classes for a long time.
I never realized that. That's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, but I'm trying to readjust my schedule for Sunday so I can come down and see you. Because
that's nice. And thank you for mentioning my little career in film. That was nice of you to do that.
Well, I again, when I came across the book and everything, and it popped up on my Facebook feed that you were going to be in Morgantown for something that I might be interested in, I started going back because, like I said, your dad's movies were a big part of my childhood.
Right.
Because we all remember them. And the funny thing is, my kids, I have a soon-to-be 22-year-old, a 17-year-old, and my 14-year-old daughter also watch his stuff.
Oh, are you in your 40s?
I'm in my 50s. I'm 55.
Oh,
soon
50s.
To be 56.
Okay.
So, but especially the Herbie film, because my two boys are really big Volkswagen fans, and that's how they got addicted was because of that car and that movie and your dad. And again, it's just fantastic to be able to talk to you about that and being able to do that.
Okay.
So,
that's nice.
But again,
I wish I don't have any Herbie stories. I would have mentioned them. But
Well, There's a few out there, from what I understand, when he worked with Dean Jones in that film. And again, why they didn't use him in the one after that is beyond me, because I think your dad basically was the replacement for Buddy Hackett. Did an excellent job, and he did. He played that position very well, that part very well. So anyway, but Karen, thank you very much. I will let you know when this posts, and
okay,
and that way you can share it, and I'll share it, and we'll see how many more people we can get to Parkersburg and Morgantown this weekend.
Well, that'd be awesome. Thank you again.
Hey, thank you very much. You have a great evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, a big thank you goes out to Karen Knotts for joining me today, the daughter of Don Knotts. And also, don't forget, you can see her this coming weekend. First off, March 12th from 8 until 10 p.m. in Parkersburg, West Virginia. She'll be doing her program Tied Up in Knots. And then on Sunday, March 13th from 4 p.m. until 6 p.m., she'll be in Morgantown, West Virginia. And if you want more information about her show and her book, stop by her website, KarenKnotts.com. Again, that's KarenKnotts.com. Well, everybody, you have a great one. We'll talk to you next time here on The Bill Alexander Show.
Thank you for listening to The Bill Alexander Show. The Bill Alexander Show is a $1 Million Baby production. For more information, go to thebillalexandershow.com.